Hello everyone, and today we're going to be talking about Little Nightmares 2. Again. Okay, so in the last Little Nightmares 2 video, we talked about the game's ending and what it could mean. I also did a playthrough of the game on my channel, so please watch that. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about every other monster in Little Nightmares universe, and the common threads between them, and what their stories might be. Okay, so the wilderness stage is the first stage of the game, starting with Mono emerging from a TV, the players of the game having no idea where he came from. Mono makes his way through the forest, avoiding various traps set by this hunter, until Mono finds this hunter's cabin. Here he finds an array of people who were killed by the hunter and then stuffed like animals. We'll talk more about these stuffed people later, but I believe they're very important to the story of Little Nightmares 2. This area is also the place where Mono finds Six for the first time and attempts to befriend her, just before encountering the hunter, with him chasing Six and Mono through the rest of the forest, a swamp, and finally ending up in the hunter's gun shack, before Mono and Six shoot him and presumably killing him. Speaking of the hunter, let's talk about him a bit. The hunter is the first enemy in the game, wearing a woolly coat and cloth potato sack over his face, with a single eye hole in it. He also carries a lantern and a gun to track down and kill his prey with, which unfortunately happens to be us. Now, one of the most interesting parts of the hunter's shack is the people seen throughout it. These people appear to have been killed by the hunter, similar to how you would taxidermy an animal. Now, this hunter appears to be obsessed with taxidermy to a disturbing extent, as we can not only see people and other animals stuffed in his shack, but from this early concept art, it seems the hunter was literally stuffing trees. Yes, trees. Okay, now a lot of people have said that these stuffed people that we see throughout the hunter's cabin are the hunter's family, and he killed and stuffed them after being driven to insanity by the signal tower. However, there is plenty of evidence in the game that contradicts that these people are actually the family of the hunter, and it seems far more likely that these people were just random townsfolk caught in the hunter's traps. Not only towards the beginning of the game can we see several bodies caught in a net, and even more bodies later in the attic of the hunter's shack, but in the very early concept art for the game, we can actually see a bunch of traps that didn't make the final cut. And among those traps are many other unfortunate victims caught by the hunter to be killed and stuffed. There's also this poor little piggy that got gutted, and oh, why did that thing have to die? Look at it, it's so cute! Yo, can we get some F's in the chat for that pig? Further evidence for these people not actually being related to the hunter is later in the city stage we can actually see a missing person poster that bears a striking resemblance to the kid from the hunter's shack, with the stuffing spilling out of his eye. Now, another thing to note is that text on any poster in Little Nightmares 2 is in a language that actually looks very similar to Japanese kana, even though it is still gibberish. So with the first game having a very decidedly Japanese style and architecture to it, and the attire of the lady and guests also looking very Japanese, could it be possible that the entire world of Little Nightmares takes place in 1950s Japan? The school is the second chapter in Little Nightmares 2. Mono and Six first encounter it after escaping the hunter and going through a lake on the raft. After making their way through a few city streets, they finally end up at the school, and quickly encounter its malevolent students who shove Mono in a locker and kidnap Six. Real 7th grade moment there, guys. So anyway, Mono makes his way through the school on his own, and eventually encounters the teacher, a slimy old woman who has the ability to stretch her neck out to seemingly any length to better watch her ceramic students. After Mono sneaks past her classroom, avoids her in a library, and solves a chess puzzle, he finally ends up at the lunchroom, where he finds the remains of the lunch lady stuffed in a freezer, more on her later, and fights his way through the students, eventually wearing one of their masks as a disguise before encountering the teacher once again in her science lab. Now, what's interesting here is it actually seems like this teacher was once in fact the science teacher, as she definitely does seem to know what she's doing in the science lab, and the lecture she gave the students earlier could have been science related, that is, if any of it was actually intelligible. So then that begs the question, what happened to the other teachers? Well, we know that there was at least a lunch lady and a principal from the concept art, and this guy seen by the chessboard puzzle could have also been another teacher, as it seems that the students drew a mustache on him, possibly signaling that they knew him and did not like him. Okay, so who killed all the teachers then? Well, it was most likely the students, as we know that they don't like the teachers, and it doesn't seem like there would be anyone else in the school who would have any sort of motive to kill a lunch lady. The only reason the science teacher must have survived was because she was the most brutal and strict out of the teachers. Okay, so after Mono makes his way past the science lab and rescues 6, they finally make it out of the school and confront the teacher in her piano room, just barely making it out of the school alive after a close call with the teacher in a ventilation shaft. Okay, now a lot of people have actually said that they do think that the school has had regular children in it at one point, and that the doll children were taken here by someone. A while ago, someone pointed out that in the Little Nightmares mobile prequel, Very Little Nightmares, you can actually see someone who looks a lot like the teacher in one of the portraits, standing next to a tall, thin man in black pants who looks a lot like the Thin Man, but probably isn't. If the Thin Man and Hanging Man are actually different people, then the man in this portrait could finally give the Hanging Man a real identity. So anyway, it is inferred that these two characters are the Pretender's parents. And if you remember from my very first Little Nightmares theory ever, it seemed that the purpose of the nest was to capture and kill children before turning them into dolls. So as we know that the teacher probably had connections to the nest in some way, what if these dolls weren't just made for the Pretender, but also taken to the school by the teacher? These dolls could have been brought to life in a similar method as to how the Doctor reanimates the mannequins. So now the question remains. What happened to the original students of the school? Why were the porcelain students taken here? Now to answer that, we have to talk about the hospital. The hospital's stage begins with Mono and 6 coming in from the city and making their way down to the lower wards of the hospital through a broken elevator shaft, and then crossing a second elevator shaft filled with suspended beds. Finally making their way to a room where they cross over a TV portal and find this sort of hub area, where the only way out is through a door, and the switch to open this door is broken, needing power cells to fix it. So Mono and 6 go looking for these power cells, and that is when they first encounter the Mannequins. The Mannequins are by far the most difficult enemy in the entire game, at least for my excruciating playthrough of it. Please go watch that, by the way, links in the description. These patients at the hospital will swarm you in the dark hospital wards, but seize up once you shine your flashlight. Now, one interesting thing to note about the Mannequins is that they're not actually mannequins at all, but in fact severely medically altered people wearing tons of prosthetics. The things that look like mannequin parts are actually old-fashioned prosthetic limbs. These little ceramic faceplates that they wear are actually facial prosthetics, most commonly used in World War II and World War I to cover up scars and injuries left by the war, which you can see a ton of these mannequins using in the game. Okay, so anyway, I believe that there are some pretty major connections between the hospital and the hunter's cabin. Like, look at this one scene from the first stage of the game where the hunter has a ton of these prosthetic limbs in the attic of his shack. So I have a pretty interesting theory on why this could be. What if the hunter was a patient of the hospital at one point? Now, the two most notable pieces of prosthetics in the hunter's shack are an arm and a face piece. Now, one of the first things you'll notice about the hunter is that there's actually a tear in his coat with stuffing poking out of it. Now, this could just be the inside of his coat, but a lot of people have speculated that he may have taxidermied himself, looking to replace the prosthetic limbs that were placed there by the Doctor. As for the face piece, that could actually be the reason that the hunter wears a bag over his head, to conceal his mangled face after being screwed with by the Doctor, instead of, as most people thought, wearing the paper bag to cover up the deformities that the signal tower has inflicted upon him. Now, the patients themselves are actually quite interesting, as we don't really know what they are. Their official description reads, "The patients cannot live with themselves. They look in the mirror and hate what stares back. They beg the Doctor to fix them and make them whole again." Now, a lot of people have taken this to mean that the patients are the viewers with the screwed up faces going to the Doctor to get their faces unscrewed up. However, this seems unlikely, as we actually see the Doctor creating one of these prosthetic mannequin abominations, and the face of the person is actually pretty normal. In fact, before the Doctor brutally tears the head off, it's probably one of the most normal faces we've seen so far in the Little Nightmares universe. Even from the concept art of the mannequins, we can see that most of them have very normal looking faces, and damn, some of these guys do be looking kinda thick though. Okay, let's quickly talk about what we know about the Doctor. After Mono and 6 make it through the mannequin area and retrieve the power cores, they take an elevator even deeper into the hospital and sneak past the Doctor and his morgue. before the Doctor finally chases them into an incinerator and gets trapped inside by Mono, then burnt alive while Six watches in delight. The Doctor is definitely one of the most mysterious characters in the game, with nothing really being revealed about him during the game. However, again, the concept art may hold a few clues. In these images here, we can see who we presume to be the Doctor in an operating theater, standing and not crawling along the ceiling as usual. It definitely does seem like the world of Little Nightmares used to be more normal at some point, before the influence of the signal tower. We can also see the Doctor's portrait hanging on a wall in the Residence DLC of the Maw. Okay, so what's my theory about all this? Well, there seems to be one running theme going not just between all the locations of Little Nightmares 2, but also in Very Little Nightmares as well. All the characters in Little Nightmares are obsessed with these sort of crafted monsters. With Very Little Nightmares, it's the dolls. With the forest, it's the taxidermied people. In the school, it's the porcelain children. And in the hospital, it's these mannequins. Almost every character has an obsession with sort of Frankensteining these abominations together out of things at their disposal. So the obvious question here would be why? Why are these people doing this? Now this is a bit tricky on the surface, as there doesn't really seem to be any reason revealed yet, but I do have some ideas. Okay, so we know that everyone in the world is dying. People are either getting sucked into the TVs or committing suicide. A lot of the cities and the world in general just seems to be empty. Even the children aren't safe from the signal. Looking back at the, you guessed it, concept art, we can see these odd wires going into the children's heads and getting sucked into the TVs. So what if all the enemies in Little Nightmares 2 are simply trying to create life, and crafting these creatures is their way of trying to replace what they have lost to the never-ending signal of the televisions? Alright, so one final little observation before I go. It seems that the symbol of the eye means power in this world. Like most characters in the Little Nightmares universe have their eyes covered with masks or hoods or blindfolds, like the janitor, the hunter, the chefs, and even Mono, the list goes on. And people who a child would most likely see as having a lot of power have exposed eyes, like doctors or teachers. Those types of people would seem very powerful in the mind of a child. Now this is interesting because the final monster of the game is made of eyes, symbolizing that it possesses the ultimate power. I know that this isn't consistent 100% of the time, like with the lady, but I think it's definitely still something to consider nonetheless, especially since we've been speculating over why most of these characters have their eyes covered for years. Yo, guys, we got a new microphone. We finally got a new microphone. After the old one, broke. Well, actually, there were 3 old ones, and they all broke, so, yeah. Don't get a blue snowball mic, they suck. So yeah, thank you for watching the video. I put so much effort into this video, so if you could just please click that subscribe button, that would be so helpful, and, goodbye. I will see you in the next video.